If it's Thursday, 4 more states today begin enforcing near total bans on abortion, putting the procedure out of reach for millions more women across the country. What's next in post-Roe America? Plus, President Biden makes his return to the campaign trail, holding his first rally of the midterm season as he battles low approval ratings and some growing backlash over his plan to cancel student debt. And a judge has ruled that parts of a key Mar-a-Lago search warrant document will be unsealed tomorrow. What we expect to see and what it means ahead. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. More than 40 million Americans live in states today with less abortion access than they had yesterday, as near total bans officially went into effect in 4 states: Idaho, Tennessee, Texas, and Oklahoma. All told, more than 20 states have now moved to impose new restrictions since this summer's Supreme Court ruling. The Washington Post reports nationwide 1 in 3 women has now lost access to an abortion. 1 in 3. It is a staggering number, one that has completely shifted our political landscape ahead of the midterms. In Idaho, a federal judge granted the Department of Justice a temporary injunction against part of that state's ban last night. The injunction allows doctors to continue providing abortions as emergency medical care. The DOJ sued Idaho, claiming emergency medical care is a federal constitutional right. The judge ruled in the government's favor. Now, big picture, it's a rare, narrow, and temporary win for the Biden administration's broader fight against this summer's Supreme Court ruling. The rest of Idaho's law, for example, banning all abortions with narrow exceptions for criminally reported rape and incest, went into effect, going well beyond the state's previous 6-week limit. There are 3 other states where the DOJ has not intervened, with bans going into effect today. These new laws, and some of the most restrictive in the country. In Tennessee, the previous 6-week abortion restrictions is now replaced with an almost total ban with no exceptions for rape or incest. Oklahoma's law is similar, tightening restrictions by taking away exceptions for rape and incest. The state's old law was enforced through civil lawsuits. Now performing almost any abortion is a criminal act. Texas, where a pre-Dobbs ban was also enforced by civil complaints, has also moved to make abortion a felony, with doctors facing up to life in prison. The only remaining exception is for the life of the mother. And another ban is set to go into effect tomorrow in North Dakota, where the state's only clinic has already moved to Minnesota. As we noted, the fallout from these bans has been intense. In a new Pew poll released this week, 56% of voters said abortion was a very important issue in their midterm vote, up 13 points since March, before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And the issue is engaging voters, even those who normally stay out of politics. Take a listen to what one Michigan voter said at an abortion roundtable today.
We have to be more diligent. We have to vote in pro-choice people, and that I've never been politically active before. I've always voted, but June 24th, I cried for 24 hours straight, and the next morning I Googled how do I organize a protest, and I mean, this has motivated me, and this is the fight of my life.
So stunning to hear someone say they've never been politically motivated, and now that's changed. Joining me now to discuss this is NBC News reporter Chloe Atkins and Elizabeth Sepper, a professor of law at the University of Texas Law School who specializes in health law and reproductive rights. Thanks so much to both of you for getting us started on this critical topic today. And Chloe, I want to start with you. Abortion was already restricted in these states, as we were talking about. So what is the significance of these new laws that are going to go into effect today?
Good to be with you, Christian. Like you just mentioned, abortion was already difficult to obtain in many of these states, where states moved to further restrict access this week and even this morning. But what changes here is that states have rolled back the time where patients are able to obtain abortion services, and has also upped the ante on the criminal and civil charges that providers could face if they decided to break the law. So, for example, in Idaho and in Tennessee, abortion services were available up until 6 weeks, up until this morning. Now we have a near total ban on all abortions, except if someone's life is in danger. Now, we can make our way down to Texas, and abortion was already purely out of reach because providers had already left June 23rd and stopped providing services in preparation for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But what their criminal penalties do now is that providers can now face like a life imprisonment and around $100,000 in fines. So this is a huge uptick in criminal penalties that they could face, Kristen.
It's just staggering to hear what the ramifications could potentially be. Elizabeth, I want to turn to you and discuss specifically what the DOJ's action does and what it doesn't do in Idaho. This was very narrow. They were essentially saying that if a doctor needs to perform an abortion in the case of emergency, that still needs to be allowed. And it was on that very narrow provision that the injunction was granted. What does that say about the DOJ's strategy? What do you make of that move?
I think it's part of a broader strategy. There's the federal law that protects a right to emergency treatment, including for pregnancy complications, which sometimes requires offering abortion care. And so the DOJ's lawsuit was meant to carve out a little more space within the Idaho law. So as it stands now, under the temporary restraining order, Idaho's law has to allow abortions where there's serious jeopardy to someone's life, where there's serious impairment of bodily functions, or where there's serious dysfunction of body parts possible. So much broader than life-saving, but still narrow, still really about those complications that seriously risk someone's life on an emergency basis. But this is really essential for people with wanted or unintended pregnancies who experience pregnancy complications like miscarriage or ectopic pregnancies.
So, Elizabeth, given this, how big of a win was this for the Justice Department?
It's a start. So it means a lot for Idaho women. And so it does ensure them some emergency care during pregnancy, but it's only about the Idaho law. So I suspect that we will see the DOJ make arguments against other extreme abortion bans like Idaho's, that only allow life-saving abortions, but not emergency health-saving abortions.
And Chloe, you've been tracking what the impact has been on the ground so far. What has the effect been, and have women had to travel already, even though, you know, these laws are just starting to go into effect? Are we already starting to see the ramifications?
That's right. We are already starting to see the ramifications of the overturning of Roe v. Wade and states rolling back abortion rights. Many people are leaving their homes, their states, crossing state lines in order to obtain abortion services in quote-unquote abortion safe haven states, which are liberal-leaning coastal states. But the key thing here is, Kristen, it's only if someone can afford to travel out of state. Typically speaking, many Americans don't have a couple $100s in emergency funds. An abortion procedure costs around $500, and the cost of the procedure goes up as the pregnancy progresses. And we're not even counting airfare, gas, or staying overnight. So that leaves many people at home being forced to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term, which can then lead to unwanted health outcomes or risks, or even pushing them further into poverty. But one thing that has definitely emerged over the past couple of years is self-managing. Folks are self-managing their own abortions using medication, whether it's buying it online or getting it through a trusted community member. I talked to one woman named Emma who self-managed her own abortion with medication that her friend got from traveling across the Mexico border. She went to Mexico, obtained the medication there, and then brought it to Emma, and Emma successfully and safely terminated her pregnancy in her home in Texas.
Elizabeth, weigh in on that. The fact that women are having to travel and women who can't afford to do so are not traveling, and that they are seeking to manage their own abortions through at-home care. And as Chloe just laid out, having to cross the border in some cases to get the medication necessary to do so. What are the ripple effects of that?
So in Texas, we've had a 6-week abortion ban in place since September 1st of last year, so nearly a year of experience. So we know that a number of people find themselves self-managing their abortions in the state. These are medically safe, though legally perhaps a little risky. State laws in Texas and a number of other states don't allow prosecution of the pregnant person. But the example, for instance, of the friend who went to Mexico and brought back the medication abortion, that friend could look at criminal charges in the state of Texas, and a number of other state laws operate in that way. So the helpers of people getting abortions are actually in the legal crosshairs at this point in time.
And I do think it's interesting and important to think about who is actually impacted. Who would potentially be held liable. In this instance, you're saying someone who helps a woman obtain an abortion, and certainly we know doctors. Elizabeth, can you talk a little bit about the impact, even if anecdotally, on some of these laws are confusing, some of them are inconsistent. What is the impact on doctors who may want to provide an abortion, think that it is necessary to save a woman's life, but not 100% sure and therefore hesitant to do so?
The place we've been seeing the conflict arise most clearly is in the emergency department. So someone experiencing a pregnancy complication where it's not clear that their condition puts their life at risk, as Texas law requires, or some of the other statutes use language like serious risk of substantial and irreversible impairment of bodily functions. And doctors aren't sure what this language is. How sick do they have to let their patients get? So we've seen people turned away miscarrying. We've seen physicians who are hesitant to treat ectopic pregnancies, which can easily become life-threatening and are always health-threatening. But we're seeing these problems of criminalization extend more broadly, right? Oncologists who see patients whose pregnancy means that they won't be able to get cancer treatment, and it may make their cancer progress much more quickly. We've also seen physicians, OBGYNs, family physicians all across the board wondering if they can even talk about abortion with their patients after these laws have gone into effect.
All right. Well, what a great conversation to start us off. Really appreciate it, Chloe and Elizabeth. Thank you. And joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman from Michigan, Debbie Dingell, who was a part of that panel that we were just talking about. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's good to be with you.
And the panel does come on a day when these new trigger laws are going into effect. We just talked about them. The Biden administration did sue Idaho over its law, and again, that very narrow emergency provision. Are you satisfied that the Biden administration, that the president is doing enough to challenge a lack of abortion access across the country?
I think we're at a very complicated time in what the federal government can do and what the state governments can do. You know, what horrified me today at this roundtable, which women of very different backgrounds, a couple of medical doctors shared their stories, talked about how they felt. I did not know now that pharmacists are requiring pregnancy tests of some of their customers, if it's a medicine that none of us even think of, could impact the health of an embryo before they'll give someone the medicine. We really need, this is about women's health care, and we need to protect women's health care. I believe this is an individual decision. It's up to the woman, her doctor, her faith, her partner, her family, whoever she wants to be. And as these laws are becoming tighter and you hear more and more stories of doctors who are afraid to care for high-risk patients because they might have a miscarriage, and what can they do? Doctors talking about very real situations that they're having to deal with. It's very complicated, but I think the president's hands are tied to some extent because of this ruling, about what can be done at the federal level until we take action in the Congress. The Senate passes legislation we've already passed in the House.
And obviously we are seeing some voters newly energized, more energized by this issue. The voter in your panel said as much in a new Pew poll, in fact, showed an increase in voters who say abortion is important to their midterm vote compared to before the Dobbs decision. We all saw this play out in real terms in New York and in Kansas as well. But I guess the question is, Congresswoman, how do you ensure that voters stay motivated around this issue? Here we are in August, and as you know, the races are not until November.
I think that it's very important that people understand elections have consequences. There were a million of women who marched on Washington who I would like to see march again late September, early October. The young woman that you saw talking to the governor today, I attended, by the way, the rally that she organized, and she talked about, I was scared to death, if you want to know the truth, about what was going to happen. She comes from a small town in my downrivers. Quite frankly, a lot of them voted for President Trump. Wyandotte is a very Catholic community. And I was stunned at the turnout at that rally. And it was people of all generations. You know, there are women who had to fight to get us where we are today. And they can't believe that we're going back and that we're having to do that fight. But young women, I can't tell you how amazed I am as I travel my district for was in that roundtable today. Young women who cannot believe anybody's going to tell them what they can do with their body, that it's their personal health care and no one else has the right. They are energized in a way I haven't seen. And we got to remind them, elections have consequences.
Well, and again, and we did see that play out in Kansas when we saw turnout that actually approximated a presidential year. What was notable about Kansas, though, is that abortion was literally on the ballot in the form of a constitutional amendment. Do you think it was a mistake for Democrats not to get abortion on the ballot in more places, to make voters go to the polls and want to vote on that singular issue as a way to continue to drive turnout?
I wish more people had anticipated that what a lot of us thought was going to happen would. It is on our ballot in November, by the way, because the governor saw this happening. And by the way, we collected 800,000 signatures in a matter of a few weeks to get this issue on the ballot. So we're going to have to, people who care about women's health care, this is a women's health care issue, pure and simple, are going to have to remind people about what's at stake, and they're going to have to elect people that are going to fight for women to make their own decisions about their body.
I appreciate that, Congresswoman. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the other big news today, which is the president's announcement on student loans. He's extending the pause. He's giving relief of $10,000 to those who make less than $125,000. Some economists, though, are warning that it could add to inflation, including Jason Furman, who tweeted, quote, pouring roughly $500 billion of gasoline on the inflationary fire that is already burning is reckless, doing it while going well beyond one campaign promise and breaking another. What is your reaction to what you are hearing from some economists who worked in the Obama administration who are concerned about inflation? Is this the wrong time to extend the student loan pause?
You know, I have a lot of feelings about this because I don't think it solved a lot of the problems, but President Biden made a promise, and he is trying to help those most in need reduce the stress that they have on them about how they're going to pay this debt. And it's really, quite frankly, keeping a lot of young people up at night. But I think we've got to do more real things like, you know, we look at other countries, we look at the state of Tennessee under a Republican governor that gives community colleges 2 years free tuition. We need to look at how we incentivize people to go into fields where there are real shortages so that perhaps we pay for their tuition and then in turn they give us their public service. We've got a total lack of psychiatrists.
Congresswoman, it sounds like you're saying that the president hasn't gotten to the root cause and root issue here.
We got to work at it more. I agree with that. And you know what I think of these armchair economists who like to get a lot of attention? It's really easy to take the shots. Let's get some concrete. I'm really tired of these armchair economists who love to take the shots and get attention, but aren't really working hard to try to solve some of our nation's problems. And I think President Biden has done a lot in the last few weeks to address many of the problems that are facing us in this country.
And he is going to be holding his first campaign rally in Maryland tonight, as you know. He's going to be speaking to the DNC. Do you see President Biden as an asset on the campaign trail, given his approval ratings are still in the low 40s?
So I want to say this. I'm really proud to call Joe Biden my friend. And I've invited him, and I sure hope he's coming to the car show in Michigan in September. I think that it's so easy for people to take shots, not come to the table and find common solutions. You need to look at what we have gotten done in the last few weeks and months and talk about that and contrast ourselves to Republicans and talk about the real issues. I mean, we've gotten health care. We're going to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. And we have Republican senators who would not vote to cap the cost of insulin for people that have private insurance at $35 a month. We need people to explain that. And I could go through a litany of them. They want to privatize Social Security or eliminate it. Seniors need to know about what they're doing. I think Joe Biden is working hard and delivering in a very divided country, and that Democrats need to be proud that we work with him, and we've gotten a whole lot more done than some previous presidents have.
And to follow up on that question very quickly, do you want to see him run again in 2024?
I want to get to, I'm so sick of these gotcha questions and everything else. I'm focused right now on the November election, keeping the House, keeping the Senate, and right now I asked him already personally, but I'm even saying on your show, Joe Biden, I hope you're coming to Michigan to see our cars in September.
And no gotcha intended at all, but just to be clear, you want to see him come to Michigan? Do you want to see him run again in 2024?
If he wants to run, well, let's see what he's going to do. What? That is a gotcha question. I am one of those people that have said for a long time, politics is a long game, and it is a lifetime between now and 2024. So ask me that question after we kept the House, which we will, and the Senate in November, and then let's start looking at 2024.
I'll hold you to it. I'll ask you again then, and hope you'll come back. Really appreciate it. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, great to talk to you as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, President Biden hits the road, returning to the campaign trail today amid mixed reactions, including from some in his own party to his new student loan forgiveness plan, as we were just talking about with the Congresswoman. We'll have the very latest from the White House next. Plus, canceled debt, abortion fights, and the ebbing red wave, the changing midterm outlooks for both parties. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade hasn't just changed the midterm political landscape. It's changed the entire way some campaigns are even talking about the issue of abortion. For example, Democrat Pat Ryan made abortion a focal point of his campaign en route to Tuesday's special election win to Congress. But he framed the Supreme Court decision as a government infringement on personal freedoms issue, almost making a libertarian argument. Take a listen to Ryan talking to my NBC News colleague Dasha Burns on Election Day.
We have fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right for a woman to have access to safe abortion, to have reproductive rights being ripped away. And so much of this race has been about standing up and saying that is not who we are as Americans. The idea that the government is going to tell women and people what to do with their bodies, that is not, I'm a West Point grad, an Army veteran. I risk my life to defend all freedoms for all people, including the right to choose.
Similarly, opponents of the Kansas constitutional amendment that was dramatically defeated this summer ran a campaign that also made libertarian-style arguments, calling the amendment a referendum on more government control. To get into all of this, I'm joined by my panel, national political correspondent at Politico, Meredith McGraw, Bernie Sanders advisor, Faiz Shakir, and Republican strategist Jim Dornan. Thanks to all of you for being here. Faiz, let me start with you. Do you think that people are overstating the impact that abortion may have in November as an energizing issue? We saw it in Kansas. We saw it in the New York special election. But as you just heard me ask Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, can you keep the momentum going?
Well, if you go out and talk to generic Democratic voters right now and you ask them what issues are on their mind, you're going to get this answer around abortion rights, and you're also going to get a higher level of enthusiasm than you would have gotten 6 months ago. So I think that's a good sign for Democrats. Can you build them and maintain the enthusiasm? I think you want to couple that with an economic argument. To your point of Pat Ryan, he had on air a fight against corporate monopolies as one of his main ads alongside abortion. So it was a case for both personal freedom and economic freedom. And I think you can argue that the Democratic Party has the mantle of freedom to fight for if they choose to do so.
Which has always sort of historically been associated with one of the Republican arguments on a range of different issues. I want to play you an ad, Jim, that we saw from Pat Ryan this week, and then get your reaction on the other side.
How can we be a free country if the government tries to control women's bodies?
That's not the country I fought to defend. I'm Pat Ryan, and I approve this message because in Congress, I'll fight to protect all of our freedoms.
What do you make of this strategy? And it sounds similar to some of the ads that we've heard from Republicans on a range of other issues. From
I think it's absolutely brilliant. I think that Democrats, with all due respect, are finally getting the messaging that we've been so good at for very long. I think they've come into their own.
Well, how nervous does that make Republicans?
Well, very nervous, very nervous. Well, it's almost like a double whammy. Yeah. Not only do we have abortion rights being challenged, we've got Donald Trump. And so on suburban independent women, they don't like either one of those decisions. And so I think that they are very much going to be fired up to come out and vote and not vote Republican. We had those voters. We had them with inflation and we had them with gas tax. And now we're overplaying our hand in these states. And then we've got Trump on the front page of the news. This is not a good sign for the party for the midterms.
And yet it's still just August, Meredith. But Jim raises the point about inflation. That had really been the centerpiece of a lot of Republican campaigns. You are starting to see the numbers tick down, certainly still soaring above where it was pre-pandemic levels. But is that starting to lose its heft as a campaign issue? What are Republicans telling you?
Well, I think what we saw in Kansas was such a wake-up call for Republicans. And, you know, even with a Politico story we had out yesterday about a call that Ronna McDaniel had with donors, there is a great fear that Democrats have really been able to take advantage of this issue when it comes to fundraising and when it comes to motivating people to come out to polls. And I think you've seen a real difference with the way that the issue is being talked about at the state level versus how we've seen some senators talk about it on the Hill, where they recognize that they have to sort of play this delicate dance with how they talk about abortion rights and restrictions, because it could end up haunting them in the midterm elections.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, as I was talking about with the Congresswoman, abortion is not necessarily on the ballot as a singular issue in a lot of these races. You're going out to vote for a candidate, Faiz, and that makes it more complicated.
Yeah, but I do think that there's a higher level of enthusiasm now than you're seeing during the Biden presidency on the left. And it's a credit really to the White House. They've stacked a number of victories for themselves at the right time, and the conditions of the economy are improving. Gas prices are going down. There are certain measures in the real world and in the political world that are trending in their favor.
And yet here he's announced student loan debt, which has gotten relief, I should say, which has gotten criticism from those on the right, from economists, and also from those on the left. Faiz, let me get your reaction. Does it step on the abortion message? That was a potent political
there's
issue.
A whole category of young people who are going to be core to this midterm election, the Democrats whose votes they need to count on. This is a great message directly to them. But also you're taking on a fight against all these economists, these pointed at, elitists who want to say, if you do trickle-down economics and give a tax break to Jeff Bezos, that's good. We're good with that. But if you want to give direct stimulus to working people to alleviate student debt, that's a problem with our economy. I mean, go ahead, take that fight on directly. That's a great argument, I think, for all of us to have.
Jim, what's interesting, I think, is that you have the issues that fire up people to go to the polls, and then you have the issues that people are just fired up about. Do you think people go to the polls over an issue like student loan debt?
I think, and this is actually a good point, that I think that young voters who don't normally, and I'm going to question the timing, the policy I won't question, I'll question the timing of this particular announcement. We're less than 10 weeks out, right, for the midterms. What I would say is, all right, you want to fire up younger voters. I get that, and I understand that, but they don't normally vote in midterms. The people that are going to be very angry about this, middle class, people who paid their debt when they went to college, or blue-collar workers who didn't go to college, are they going to be that ticked off? Yeah, I think they are. So I think it's a political miscalculation. obviously the White House doesn't agree with me on this, but I think that this may be giving us something that we didn't expect to get.
Meredith, let me read you what Tim Ryan said in Ohio. He said, while there's no doubt that a college education should be about opening opportunities, waiving debt for those already on a trajectory to financial security sends the wrong message to the millions of Ohioans without a degree working just as hard to make ends meet. Of course, he's the Democrat running in Ohio. How politically difficult is this for those Democrats who are locked in these tight, very competitive races?
Well, I think Tim Ryan's response says it all. In a lot of ways, Republicans came out pretty swift and clear with their opposition to this. They said it could lead to potentially tuition hikes. This hurts middle class people. And Tim Ryan's answer there, saying it sends the wrong message. I do think Republicans are really going to hone in on this as we move towards November.
Yeah. And one of the big questions, President Biden's going to be out campaigning. He's going to have his first campaign event tonight in Maryland, a DNC rally. I guess the question becomes, is he an asset on the campaign trail or does he hurt on the campaign trail? Where should he be used?
You saw the recent, Gallup poll that just came out that shows him like up 10 points or 6 points, I think, up to 44 in approval numbers. And so he's rising, clearly. And in addition to that, I think, if you look at his political standing, the thing that I would caution is that there's going to be a lot of retrospective looking backwards, saying I did X and I did Y and I did Z. But in addition to that, I would urge them to make sure they have an agenda going forward. That, to the point of that Tim Ryan's raising around student debt. Okay, free tuition at community colleges. That used to be something we were fighting for. Don't forget it. Yeah. Keep it on the agenda. Put me back in office. Help me get elected so I can fight for that.
Jim, I want to go back to a point that you were making. You brought up former President Trump. So let me remind folks of the breaking news that we are going to be covering, which is that the judge has announced that he is going to unseal what we anticipate is going to be a heavily redacted version of the affidavit that justified the search at Mar-a-Lago. What is the practical and real world impact of these headlines? The fact that it's soaking up so much oxygen this close to the midterms that's focused on the former president?
Well, if you read Meredith's article this morning, which I did,
I encourage everyone to do so.
He's fired up about it. I'm more of the be careful what you wish for. FBI does not make random searches like that to a former presidential president's home. I'm not confident that he's going to get out of this what he wants. He's using it right now. That's fine. He's raising money off it. That's fine. But I think in the end, he better hope he's not indicted.
Meredith, final word on this.
I would say so much of Trump's legal strategy is about PR and is about public appearances. So while he might be publicly, talking about his poll numbers and his fundraising, there's certainly reason to believe that he could be in some real hot water here.
Yeah, well, we will continue to watch it and track it. Great conversation. Really appreciate it, Faiz, Jim, and Meredith. Great to see all of you. And just moments ago, the president departed for his first rally this midterm season, what we've been talking about. We are live from the White House. After a quick break, we're going to talk to Peter Alexander. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. President Biden is back from vacation with less than 75 days to the midterms. He's making his return to the campaign trail tonight. He'll be speaking at a DNC rally just up the road in Maryland, a state where Democrats are looking to flip the governor's mansion this November behind gubernatorial nominee Wes Moore. It comes as President Biden's approval rating is up to 44% in a new Gallup poll just out this afternoon, folks, including a 9-point boost among independent voters. 44% isn't a breathtaking number, but at least for now, he's out of the 30s in this poll. That's from the perspective, of course, of his allies. My NBC News colleague Peter Alexander joins us now from outside the White House. Peter, thanks so much for being here. I know it's a busy one for you. So let's just start off by talking about this student loan announcement. Of course, President Biden announced this pause on student loan payments yesterday through January. He got a lot of backlash from Republicans, economists, and some Democrats. So what's the White House saying today?
Well, the White House is feeling good about this, as we've heard now repeatedly from the podium in the White House briefing room, from the president himself and from his domestic policy advisor, Susan Rice. They say this is an argument, a fight that they're willing to have. They feel that Americans strongly support the idea of giving Americans, in their words, a little extra breathing room. But the criticism, as you've heard from Republicans in particular, and some of those moderate Democrats like Tim Ryan of Ohio, who is in a fierce fight for the Senate seat in that state, is that basically this is not the best strategy, that this is helping a lot of Americans who, frankly, have a trajectory towards success in life right now. Those who went to college. And Kristen, I should tell you, just a matter of moments ago, I spoke to an individual, a guy by the name of Gabriel. He's a master plumber outside of Savannah, Georgia. He says that he and his loved ones, they didn't go to college, or if they went to some type of trade school, they did it and they paid for it as they went, so they wouldn't stack up. They wouldn't pile up these loans. He says that this is fundamentally unfair, and certainly that is some of the criticism right now. But the president has indicated that his desire is really to help those low and middle income Americans. Again, that $10,000, that erasing of $10,000 of debt will go to individuals making up to $125,000 a year. In some parts of the country, Republicans say you can say that's middle class, but in places like Arkansas, Tom Cotton and others complain that's basically helping the rich. Their frustration is that this is a Democratic priority and that it's not focused where the money needs to be going right now, helping a lot of Americans that are still in need.
Yeah, and the White House estimating it could impact some 48 million people. Peter, let's talk about tonight, the president's return to the campaign trail after his summer vacation. What are you expecting? What are you going to be looking for?
Well, I think what's notable is that the president is now back on the campaign trail. I think he begins in earnest this effort to sort of ramp up the motivating, the fueling of the fire in the Democratic Party right now ahead of the midterms, now just a couple of months away, of course, in November. And really what it does is sort of show you that pivot point after the student loans announcement that a lot of progressives and other centrist Democrats had been waiting on a decision for more than a year. The president feels like he now has the arsenal, that ammunition, with him in terms of achievements to this point, that now he's trying to solidify the message and to help Democrats in that effort going forward. The focus again today on the CHIPS bill that the president recently signed into law to help produce more semiconductors here in the United States. The White House insists that will bring down inflation. The climate change announcement that the president got passed just a short time ago, more money directed toward combating climate than any other president has ever done in the past. And of course, this effort on student loans. The White House keeps focusing on gas prices coming down. They recognize that even if prices are high, the average price about $3.50 nationwide right now, Kristen, that many Americans, they believe, will be focused on the direction. And if they feel like the country's going more in the direction of prosperity, success, and less in the way of inflation and rising prices, they'll feel better. But those prices, they still remain very high right now. And obviously this issue of student loans raises that topic once again. And
you are absolutely right, Peter. And they are watching those prices every single day. We really appreciate it. And as you've been talking, we've been watching the event there, band getting the crowd fired up ahead of the president's rally in Maryland tonight. Okay, Peter Alexander will be watching you tonight on Nightly News. Meanwhile, we do have some breaking news to tell you about next on a judge's decision to unseal some parts of a key Mar-a-Lago search document tomorrow. I'm going to talk to two legal experts next on what to expect. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We do have some breaking news to tell you about in one of the investigations facing former President Trump. The judge overseeing the search of Mar-a-Lago has ordered parts of the affidavit supporting that search unsealed tomorrow. That version, the affidavit, will include redactions proposed by the Justice Department today, which means we may not get a lot of information from the document. Meanwhile, a separate judge has given Mr. Trump's lawyers until tomorrow to better explain why they want a special master to oversee the documents obtained in the Mar-a-Lago search. The legal team first filed its motion on Monday, 2 weeks after the search, calling it shockingly aggressive. Joining me now to discuss all of this breaking news, Danny Cevallos, a criminal defense attorney and NBC News legal analyst, and Chuck Rosenberg, a former U.S. attorney and senior FBI official who's also now an NBC News legal analyst. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. So, Danny, let me start with you. Break down what Judge Reinhart decided today. What's the significance?
The judge decided that some of the affidavit of probable cause will be released in redacted form, But what that is still remains to be seen. And you can safely assume that DOJ, when they sat down with their redacting pens, redacted as much of this as they thought they could possibly get the judge to approve. And so it seems that the judge has approved something. Now, whether that thing is a series of pages of giant black blocks entirely blotting out the words, or if there's anything of substantive information in there, really remains to be seen. But if I were betting, I would err on the side of mostly redacted.
Well, and Chuck, I know you've been saying the same thing, that you anticipate it'll be heavily redacted. But I guess the bottom line here is, what, if anything, do you think we will learn from this heavily redacted affidavit?
Yeah, so think about the affidavit in sort of two broad buckets, Kristen. A procedural bucket, explaining what the government tried to do to get these documents back. A lot of that story is already publicly known, mostly. And then a more substantive bucket, where they describe the basis for probable cause, the witnesses with whom they spoke, perhaps the evidence or documents they've reviewed, plus the scope and direction of the investigation. I think Danny's right. If we get anything, it's going to be from that procedural bucket, sort of the introductory stuff. And it might be interesting, but I don't think it's going to be earth-shattering. But from that second bucket, which describes the investigation and the witnesses, I think we're going to get very little. And by the way, Kristen, I think that's completely appropriate. There's an ongoing federal criminal investigation. And so while we may all want to read this stuff, it makes sense for the government to keep it under wraps until they make charging decisions. At that point, I would expect all or almost all of the rest of the affidavit would become public.
So, Chuck, just to follow up on that point, do you think we will learn anything new once the affidavit is unsealed?
Look, I think we'll probably confirm a good bit of public reporting from the procedural side of the affidavit. I'm loath to say, Kristen, that we will or won't learn anything new. There might be parts of the investigation that are not yet public, which the government can reveal at this point without undermining the other work they have to do. So it's always possible. But I think Danny's right. I think it's more likely than not going to be a lot of big black boxes or blocks on the affidavit, sort of obliterating the part we most want to see.
And Danny, let's talk about the Trump legal team's request for a special master. The judge is saying that the judge needs more information, essentially, that they had to go back to the drawing board and resubmit the request. What is your takeaway from that, and how does this bode for the request overall?
In a sense, I imagine some of the other federal judges that might have received this motion by the Trump team, and instead of doing what Judge Cannon did, which was essentially say, what is this? What is this document that you've given to me? I need you to explain what it is. I think the Trump team is lucky. They could have gotten a judge, and I'm sure I know plenty of judges that would have just flambéed them and thrown this motion or this request right out of court. This judge is giving them a second chance and saying, and you can read between the lines, that I don't understand what it is you've asked for. Can you please tell me what it is that you want and the basis for asking for this relief? So I expect that the lawyers will go back and beef up the areas of the motion that they think are lacking and tell the judge exactly what they want and why the judge is authorized to give it to them.
And Chuck, let's try to delve a little bit more deeply into why the former president, why his legal team would request a special master. What are they after here? Is this a delay tactic?
Well, it may in part be a delay tactic, Kristen, but it's not a crazy request. Let me explain why. When documents are seized in a situation where some of those documents may be privileged, somebody has to serve as a filter. Now, normally it's done internally within the Department of Justice. When I was a prosecutor, I've been on the filter team, and I've been on the other side of the transom, on the investigative team. It's not exciting work, but it has to be done carefully and right. And so here, I suppose, the government was going to serve as both the filter team and the investigative team, two separate teams walled off from one another, but wholly within the Department of Justice. First team reviews, second team receives stuff that they're permitted to receive. But here, and again, not crazy, the Trump folks have asked for a special master or a neutral third party to serve as that filter team. And that's been done before. in the case involving Michael Cohen and Rudy Giuliani and the searches of their belongings. They were both lawyers. There's obviously going to be some privileged information that's seized. Somebody needs to filter it out. And a judge in the Southern District of New York, in both instances, Kristen, appointed a special master to help in that process. So here, where the imprimatur of neutrality is important and you want to sort of strip all politics out of this matter, I think it makes sense. Danny's right. The Trump folks had better get back into court and explain precisely what it is they want and why they believe this court and this judge has jurisdiction to grant it. That's a relatively easy hurdle to overcome in the sense that their original pleading, I think, was severely lacking. But I expect they'll meet it, and I wouldn't be shocked if a special master was appointed in the end. Either way, somebody has to serve as the filter.
And Chuck, just to follow up, if a special master is appointed, it would likely delay the DOJ process of going through these documents, correct?
Yeah, it could slow it down a bit, Kristen. Here's why. The Department of Justice has, 2 gazillion lawyers and can throw a whole bunch of them at a filter team process. And so, they certainly have the personnel to move this thing quickly. A special master may not have the same resources. That said, it doesn't sound to me like there are hundreds of thousands of documents to review here, that the filter team's work might be a little bit more narrow. So if it's a delaying tactic, it's not a particularly good one, but to lend some neutrality to the process, I think it makes a bit of sense.
Danny, very quickly, why do you think the Trump team waited 2 weeks to file this request for a special master?
That's only one of my questions. My other questions are, weren't there affidavits attached? Why didn't they invoke any specific requests? Look, like Chuck says, it is likely that a special master will be appointed. There is precedent. However, the precedent, even cited by Trump's team, really only relates to attorneys. Just like Chuck said, you've got Rudy Giuliani and Michael Cohen. Those create a special situation where you have increased privileged issues. But ultimately, it's likely we may see a special master appointed in this case.
Chuck, last question to you, and I want to follow up again on the affidavit. Our NBC News team is pointing out that the documents can be filed electronically in the federal system outside of business hours. So from a timing perspective, there are just going to be a lot of reporters sitting at their computers. Is it possible it could come out tonight? Are we just going to be all hitting refresh overnight?
Well, I believe, right. So if a judge says I want it on a certain day, that usually means until 11:59 on that certain day. When a judge cites a specific time, I want it by noon, then you better file it by noon. So it all depends on what the judge said. But with electronic filing, as you point out, Kristen, and with a specific date, but without a specific time, you should be at your computer until 11:59 p.m.
Well, we leave this segment a lot smarter than we started it. Chuck Rosenberg, Danny Cevallos, thank you so much for helping us unpack the breaking news. Really appreciate it. And still to come, 3 months after a devastating mass shooting killed 19 children at Robb Elementary School, the man in charge of the police response that day has been fired. That story is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The school board in Uvalde, Texas, voted unanimously last night to fire Police Chief Pete Arredondo over his failed response to the shooting at Robb Elementary School, where 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. His termination comes 3 months to the day since that mass shooting, after it was revealed that law enforcement waited 77 minutes before entering the classroom the shooter was in. Prior to the school board's closed-door meeting, several students and parents voiced their frustrations and anger with Arredondo and the school board.
Your boy Pete, he dropped the ball big time.
Why the hell does he still have a job with y'all?
Turn in your badge and step down. You don't deserve to wear one.
Just chilling to hear from that student there. I'm joined now by NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, who has been following this story from the very beginning. So, Gabe, what has the reaction been, and do you expect there to be any more fallout?
Well there, Kristen. the community down in Uvalde has been calling for this firing for quite some time, and they are calling for other law enforcement officials to be fired as well. But that really remains to be seen. There continues to be state investigations into this, and also the threat of civil lawsuits as well, potentially even a class action lawsuit. But we just don't know at this point whether other law enforcement officers might be fired as well. Again, the community, some members of the community and the victims' families and survivors have been calling for just that, Kristen.
And students are set to return to classes in just 2 weeks. How are they preparing for this, Gabe?
Well, it is obviously a very difficult situation, very difficult concerns, whether they would go back to Robb Elementary. That is not happening. They will be spread out over several other campuses in the school district. And also, the district is offering the opportunity for virtual learning, at least for some of the students. But certainly a very emotional time there, Kristen. And yes, this school board meeting had been a long time coming. The school superintendent had urged the firing, or recommended the firing of Pete Arredondo before, and again, that was a unanimous decision last night, Kristen.
Well, this is a horrific story that we continue to cover, that we continue to stay on top of. Gabe Gutierrez, we thank you for all of your great reporting on this from the very beginning. Really appreciate it. And we do want to thank you for being with us this hour. Chuck will be back tomorrow on Friday with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with my colleague Yasmin Fasuvian, who's in for Hallie Jackson right now.